Africa like changes you. And I'm sure,
Yeah.
when you all have been there as well, like it changes you no matter who you are, no matter where you're from. And so for us, we knew it was going to be important because Global Talent Africa's mission is how do we decrease the unemployment rate on the continent of Africa?
All right,
Yeah.
welcome back, y'all, to another episode of Rhythm and Rome. My name is Benef, and I'm here with Paul and Trecia. And this is where we discuss our travel adventures, the similarities, differences, misconceptions, all through the lens of culture. And you'll see it looks a little bit different today because we have a guest joining us. Paul, why don't you introduce our guest and our topic today?
Well, thank you there, Benef. And yes, so we have a special guest with us today, and it is the one and only Mike Burns. We've known each other for years now, through our time in the military and stationed in different locations, and also living in the same city as well, and so on. Starting off at West Point, United States Military Academy. So Mike, welcome, and we appreciate you being here today.
Beat Navy, just had to say that.
Beat Navy, excited to be here. I am excited for the conversation. And let's do it. Let's go.
I really do want to kind of jump in, and Mike, we're so appreciative of you being here, but and we'll get to a little bit of some of those questions that we want to ask you, but I want to really get into really what people want to know. And I think what people really want to know is, if you had dinner with a fictional character, who would that be?
So
answers.
I actually believe that people do want to know that. And so it's a fictional character, which means I then need to kind of make up and like walk through like the characteristics of this character, or is it
why not
exist? So I would love, if I had the choice, to sit down and meet with the person who has the ability, right? And this is kind of more of like a superhero play, like has the ability to change people's thoughts. Not like use it though for, to change people's thoughts in a way that they can kind of direct them where they want to go, but to change people's thoughts if what they're doing and how they're thinking is not benefiting the greater society. Right. And I want to change people's thoughts to where they put themselves second or third versus putting themselves first. But that would be if I could sit down with that person and we could have dinner and they could tell me, how do they not only see what people are thinking, how do they help reposition what people are thinking? Because then maybe I could, even if I couldn't do it as well as they can, because they're superheroes.
Right.
Maybe I could take some of those skills and kind of push it forward and also try to help people think differently.
So you're hoping to glean from that as well. You want to try to get as much from that. Well, look, I'm all about taking opportunities. So that's a good one.
Mike, why don't you just take us through, kind of an introduction to, obviously more on yourself and what you and your company is all about, and then we'll go in from there.
Oh, sure will. So bottom line is I'm a father, I'm a husband. Right first. So I have two little boys who I love to death, and actually everything that I do is tied to them. So I have a 10-year-old named Shale, sweetest kid in the world, like super empathetic,
nice.
and just cares and loves and feels. And then I have a 7-year-old named Dash, who we always say if we had Dash first, there would be no Shale.
Wow.
Second child. So Dash is also sweet and amazing, but like the world orbits and everything orbits around Dash. I don't know if that's like a second child thing, because my brother is also kind of similar.
It could be. Very well could be.
So
Yes,
you all relate to a degree.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So
Definitely.
I'm definitely a father first. I'm a husband. I've been married now coming up on 20 years. Got married
amazing.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And my wife too, and this is part of the journey, is a military member, or was a service member as well. She was a pilot just like me. So as Paul said, I started my kind of professional career after West Point, graduated in 2000, and then became a pilot, not because I wanted to, but because I knew what I didn't want to do. Like I knew for sure what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to be a lawyer when I left West Point. And we all know who have gone to like the military, you can't go to like JAG or be a lawyer right after graduation.
Right.
I knew I
School.
didn't want to like march with a backpack on my back, so knew I didn't want to do infantry. And at that point in time, I thought I was somewhat claustrophobic as well, so I needed windows. So I didn't want to do a tank or anything like that.
Yeah.
Flying thing seems cool, so chose not. I didn't want to be a pilot since I was a little kid, not Top Gun type of stuff, but it just seemed
Mhm.
like a cool thing to do until I become a lawyer. But fell in love with flying. Ended up flying Apaches. That took me to doing things like a lot of folks in this call have done, Afghanistan,
Mm,
Iraq, where I learned a lot about myself, but more importantly, I learned a lot about the power of people. And that
amen.
people, if you think about it, are no matter what corner of the world you're in, they kind of all have that universal need for like common things. People want to be loved,
Mm,
people want to be valued, people want to feel like they're part of a community, people want to feel
Yep.
like they're part of like a winning formula of something. And I could probably say that's when I fell in love with this concept of like diversity, equity, inclusion, but different from way that like corporate America looks at diversity, equity,
mm,
inclusion. Because when you're
Right.
working with amazing people in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and you're tapping into their experience and
yep.
perspective to accomplish really difficult things, that's what diversity, equity, inclusion was. And so when I had the opportunity to come back to West Point to lead their diversity admissions and enrollment, I took a different lens of looking at the type of person who we wanted at West Point, because West Point was very focused on academics, as it should be, because it's a
Hmm.
university, but it was like very narrowly looking at a person. It was like, do you have this SAT score? Do you
Mhm.
have this GPA? Right. And if you think about what West Point was trying to develop in the form of like leaders,
Hmm.
I would say I would much rather look at someone who was raised in a family with 5 siblings, who mother worked 2 jobs and had to actually figure out how to work school,
Right.
a job, and
Right.
raise their
Amen.
siblings,
Yep.
right?
Right. Right.
Those
Right.
people have the attributes and propensity to probably be the leaders to solve very complex problems in the army, versus the kid who grew up in upstate Maine, who had a
Yes.
personal tutor who got a perfect SAT score. So that kind of was my first venture into diversity, equity, inclusion.
Mm.
After my time at the academy, which was 13 years into the army, I was like, oh, it's maybe time for me to leave. I want to actually see my wife. I want to really start a family. I want to do a lot of things that several people on this call probably know about, that the military sometimes limits you because you're at the beck and
Yes.
call of what the army specifically wants you to do. And so at
Yeah.
13 years, I was the crazy person who said, you know what, I think I'm going to leave. Set
Yeah. The
I'm
13
retired.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
after you hit
7
the
years to
hump, which was
retire.
I was telling you you were crazy.
Yeah. Paul was saying, but one of the things that I realized, and that I really, in the work that we do now at the Burns Brothers push, is that your worth that you put on yourself, it's not debatable, right? Like you
Hmm.
can't let someone might determine your value, and that can be done in like pay and promotion and opportunity, but like you
Right.
determine your worth. And if that value worth like alignment is off, then
Hmm.
you have to make the call as an individual. And at that point in time, the Army was telling me I wanted to actually take Paul's job, to believe it or not. He was like the PAO in like New York City. Paul had
Yeah.
been really good at helping to position me to be that role. And the
Right.
Army, nope, you're going to Fort Polk. Are you Iraq? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
actually
you're
had
going,
like a physical reaction to Fort Polk. Like I broke out in hives.
yeah, exactly. So those were my options. They were like, you're going to Fort Polk, or you're going back to Iraq because your
Yeah.
dwell time. And for those who are watching, don't know
Oh
what
my
dwell time is,
God.
it basically
Yeah.
just means that you haven't deployed
Yeah.
in a long
And
time.
for those who don't know what Fort Polk is, it's in Louisiana, in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana. So
Yeah.
Wow.
nowhere close to
Yeah.
New Orleans.
Yeah.
The disclaimer in the middle of nowhere is important because you could offend a lot of people who are from Louisiana. Yeah, so it was in the
This is
middle.
true. This is true. This is true.
Yeah,
But we have to be fair and saying it is in the middle of nowhere. That's a fact, but
it is.
yes.
It
It's
is
something.
absolutely
It is something if you're from somewhere. So let's put it that
Yes.
way. So yeah, if you're from
true.
somewhere,
True.
it yeah.
That is
You were
true.
exactly right. And so at that point in time, those were the options that I had. Go back to Iraq, go to Fort Polk,
Mm-mm.
not do what you thought you should be doing in the form of
Yeah.
like PAO, that you were going to drive a lot of value to the Army. And so I felt my worth was here. The value they put on that was here. And so
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, in that case, I'm going to go
Mm.
somewhere to where my value and my worth are better aligned. And then so I left the Army. After that, the first job I ever had in corporate America was at Citigroup to run diversity,
Mhm.
equity, inclusion globally for them. So talk about a leap. I mean, my only affiliation with banking is I had a checkbook and a credit card. I didn't know anything about banking, didn't know anything about Citigroup. Really, to be honest, I didn't know anything about diversity, equity, inclusion. But what I knew is I knew people. Once again,
Mhm.
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and the dynamics of humans. And I figure out it like that's really what it should be about, like at Citigroup. It should be not about race, gender, all those things that we
Yeah.
focus. It should be about how do you ensure that the individuals who are inside of your organizations feel like they belong, but more importantly, how do you bring people inside your organizations that will make the
Yeah.
organization better, not for the current, but for the future. And so did
Right.
Citi for a while, then got called after my second child was born by an organization I never heard of called Conduit. And they said, we were a Fortune 500 company. We were the business service arm of Xerox. We've just broken off to go public. The first mandate of the board is we got to create an office of diversity for our, at that time, it was like 60,000 employees across, it was maybe like 50 countries.
Yeah.
So I left Citi, right? And started to build out the diversity office of the company called Conduit. The cool story about opportunity and why I love the military is that I never wanted to be like full time like diversity guy, like because I
Mhm.
truly love business more than diversity,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to figure out how I could leverage my entry into Conduit through diversity, but really figure out how I can be part of the business and not just a diversity guy. And it's
Mhm.
interesting how things work for your in your favor, but I can't remember the hurricane, but there was this hurricane that came around. I guess it was around 2013, 14. It was like the one that hit Puerto Rico. It hit Houston, Dallas. It was like this huge hurricane. And I think it was a hurricane to where, there's images of like President Trump like throwing like toilet paper or paper towels.
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that
yes,
was
yes.
yeah, I
Can-
think
I
I
forget
can't
the
remember
name of
exactly
it.
where was the name of it, but yeah, it was pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a big one, and we had sites all over the globe at Conduit. And I remember the CEO calls all of his business leaders in and says, "Give me an update of what's happening with all of our sites, both with your people and with your clients." And all the business leaders just looked and didn't know what to say. And the CEO goes to the head of HR. And he's like, "Isn't that diversity guy? Isn't he an army guy? I'm sure he could figure out how to."
Oh,
There you
wow. Yeah.
go.
I moved
Yeah.
That's
from
what they all
being
do.
yeah, I moved from being the chief diversity officer to being the head of crisis management for this
Yeah.
Yep.
organization
Yeah.
immediately. That got me exposure. That led to me being the chief of staff for the whole company. And then it
Amen.
led to me ultimately running the biggest business line at Conduit, their call center, which I had no experience with as well. From like, well, I didn't even know what a call center was. I didn't even know they existed, but I knew people. And then the final thing to answer kind of the journey question, Paul, is that I moved from being the call center head to the head of like transformation as the organization was going through change. And we were looking as part of that job, I had real estate, global real estate under me. And the COVID pandemic happened, George Floyd
Yes.
happened, and it was on a
Yes. It's
call.
about the 20s, 2020.
Yeah,
Ish.
exactly. About 2020-ish. And I was on a call with the CEO and the CFO of the organization, and they said, "How's the real estate looking?" Because we had to cut costs. And
Yep.
at that point in time, that's when that George Floyd video was playing over and over and over on the news. I was in my New York City
I can
office.
relate.
You can relate. I had the two pictures of my two little black boys on the desk, and I'm on this phone call. I was like, "What the hell is what we're talking about going to ensure that what's happening on that TV is not going
Mm.
to happen for my two little?"
Amen.
And
Yep.
I hung up the
Yep.
phone. I picked up the phone, called my brother. He was a partner at a DC law firm. And I said, "Do you want to go out and change the world?" And we dropped our 2-week notice right after that in the middle of
Man,
Wow.
the
I
Burns brothers.
love that. That just
Yeah,
sounds exciting. I
That
mean,
that
that's
is
the
yeah.
journey. And the Burns
it
Brothers
is.
is just an agency now that has a whole bunch of different companies under it. But it's all around how do we create change through understanding, and then each company drives understanding and connection in different ways.
God
Yes.
damn. But can I just throw in there just 2 seconds because I want to go a little bit rewinding back to what you said in your military days because you sugarcoated it. Yes, Mike and his wife, who I know as well, Heather, who's a extremely good or great athlete. I don't know what happened to Mike, but she does triathlon and she's like kicking butt, kicking ass in it too as well. What he failed to mention is to be an aviator or pilot, it's freaking hard to get. That's
Yeah.
what he forgot to mention. No, it's important to mention that because it's not anybody can be a pilot.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
you know, talk that up and just, massage over that a
Thank
little
you.
bit, because it's a tough course, and not
And I
everybody.
actually have a question.
I'm going to take that compliment. I'm going to stick it in my pocket because I don't know where
Yeah.
to get another one from him. But I appreciate that.
No,
I actually have a question though for you, Mike. In that, what was the time frame between the transition of when you left the military until when you got that position in Citigroup? Because for a lot of folks that do end up leaving the military, it is a big jump to
Yes.
go from the military into the corporate world. So, how long did it take you to find that position with Citigroup?
So to find it, no more than about 6 months, right? And
Okay.
it's interesting because I was like looking on the web, like we all do, of like what jobs and
Sure.
opportunities, and I said, well, I got to figure out a job that I will love, like doing that will
Yeah.
have an impact, because it's hard to move, and where a lot of military folks fail is you move to a space to where for 15, 20, however many years you've been like serving, right? It's all about
Sure.
something bigger than yourself. And then to go to something that has nothing to do with that, it's really hard. And so
Sure.
I had to find
Yes.
something that at least allowed me to do something that was bigger than myself. And then leverage kind of this diversity thing, because I knew it was other people were interested in. And so I saw the city opportunity on LinkedIn. And then I used some folks that my wife knew because she was in financial services, who I knew, and really found some advocates to kind of speak up for me inside, and really kind of help push through my nomination.
Yeah.
And if it was just me
Okay.
applying, there was no way I was going to get the
Oh,
job.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the networking
And
piece of
clearly,
it.
and clearly diversity and inclusion is a
Yeah.
big deal. I'll be remiss if I did not give you another thing to put in your pocket, Mike.
Wow.
Because you also
wow.
failed to mention, which I was hoping you would have, is that between you and I, because I was the marketing guy at West Point, while we were there, we increased diversity, the highest number of female ever in the school's history, as well as Hispanics. And we also increased African Americans going to West Point.
Yeah,
Never.
so and it was really a team thing, and Paul was part of that team as well.
Awesome.
But
good
brought
stuff.
in the highest numbers, of Black, Latino.
That's
as well.
important.
Yeah.
Women
Yeah.
in
No, it
history.
is.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I want to ask specifically for one of your brands, Global Talent Africa. So, like, we started a series on just understanding Africa better, because for the three of us, we've never been there, and we have these misconceptions about what is there. And so, how does your company, the Global Talent Africa piece, try to? Because you had said you wanted to demystify this continent and just make it more accessible. And so I just want to know how you guys are doing that.
So we find that in order to demystify things, you can like come up with websites and videos and all sorts of cool marketing material, but there's nothing like feeling it, touching it, breathing it. Africa like changes you. And I'm sure, when you all have been there as well, like it changes you, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from. And so for us, we knew it was going to be important, because Global Talent Africa's mission is, how do we decrease the unemployment rate on the continent of Africa, and allow this amazing talent that's there, that's more educated, more motivated than most talent around the globe. How do we give them a chance to really lean into the skills that they bring to the table? And the only way to do that is through opportunity. And we have a saying that, talent is distributed equally, opportunity is not. Right. And so we want to demystify and change, and then by doing so, give these young people opportunity. We have to bring people who have the opportunity to the continent. And so we do a lot of trips and bring a lot of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 organizations that are already pushing work all around the world. We bring them to Africa so they can see, so they can smell, so they can touch, and so they can actually experience the talent. And 9 times out of 10, when they leave, there's 100, if not 1,000 lives that have been changed, because those people will now employ some of these people that they would have never met any other time.
That's awesome.
Amazing. No, and we've heard that said by anyone that's ever been to Africa. It says that exact same thing, that it changes you. So I want to go.
No,
let's make it a trip. We should figure out. We should do a rhythm and roam there.
This is we were just talking about that. We were just talking about that.
I'm writing it down.
Rhythm and roam in
Africa.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me tag on to what Benef had to say, Mike. So clearly you guys are doing some great stuff. But before you ever actually, because I think we also had little talks about this before you even step foot into Africa and stuff like that. What were some misconceptions you had about Africa before even traveling to Africa, and how did you end up addressing or dealing with it?
So I'll be completely open and honest with everyone. I thought Africa was dirt roads. I thought Africa was people who were hungry, who were begging. I thought Africa was everything that like the 1980s kind of like commercial media said Africa.
Yeah.
Was. I thought Africa, you always hear Africa's full of corruption and
Apartheid.
you feel Africa has no like technological infrastructure, like nothing can happen. That's exactly what I thought Africa was. And the first place I ever went to in Africa was Durban. And Durban is basically like New York, like mixed with like Sao Paulo. It's like big, cool, trendy, space to
Metropolitan.
metropolitan area. And I was like, this is not what I thought. And then I walked into our partner's office, and the only way I could get in is through retinal scan. And I was like, okay,
wow,
this is not dirt road.
Yeah.
That's like high technology.
Yeah. And then every step I took, a different misconception was like scratched off.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay? And then the final thing was, you hear that, okay, I'm thinking that they're not educated, right? And then I sit in a room with people that are like call center agents, and I ask them, like, do you have an education? Did you go to college? 100% of the people raise their hand, right? And they're call center agents, right? 100%. And I was like, well, what year's degree in? Oh, I'm a CPA. I'm a nurse. I'm a lawyer, right? Like, you have
these are real,
these are people who are just hourly call center workers, right?
Wow.
And, like call center workers, right? And what they did before me, and no offense to like McDonald's and all these, but like they were a cashier at McDonald's before they came over to the call center. They weren't lawyers, CPAs, finance professionals. And that was like the final kind of misconception of like this, just no education. Not only was that that was just scratched out, it was actually just completely thrown off the table.
Sure. Wow. That is blowing my mind to think that there's so much potential and there's so many educated folks, but because of the opportunities that aren't there in your own home country, that you cannot make a living there. You can't be who you are, or destined to be who you are where you are. So you have to leave. Per se. So
what's really interesting, I'll admit this as well, and Paul knows I'm really not good at like holding my tongue and my thoughts, and so if it needs to be edited, feel free to edit it.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good. It's all good.
I also feel that like the United States still has this weird relationship with people of color, especially like Black people. And there's
shock
Black people more than the continent of Africa. And so I think a lot of like the hesitation, some of it's tied to misperceptions, right? But some of it's tied to like just straight fear, right? Because there's probably little diligence that's done around India, or little diligence that's done around Guatemala, or little diligence that's done around other parts of the world where the US and the Western world feel real comfortable without a whole bunch of knowledge to pour in. But in Africa, it was always a little different. Like there's always the same type of checks that the Black folks in the US have to have. Like it's magnified and exemplified there.
In Africa.
So I think it's a combination with misperception, but I also think it's how the Western world views people of color.
You touched on
You're right.
You touched on not a sticky point, but a point we've made a couple of times in other episodes of our podcast. And one recently that I can remember, that I recall, was we were talking about, when we think of Africa, what do you think of? The question I asked you, and the first thing that I would say and we said was, people look at it and it's negative compared to Europe. Why do we think that there's nothing bad in Europe? And I'm like, I will go all the way to the eastern, like I've been to Lithuania and didn't feel fear, but you say I want to go to Africa, then all of a sudden the fear comes over, and I think it's an educational thing too as well. you know,
Right.
how they taught us, and it's embedded in our heads that
Right.
believe that this is bad, kind of thing.
Right.
So I appreciate
So
that.
Mike, now that you've had some time now in Africa and you've now seen these things and you've kind of had the opportunity to kind of immerse yourselves, spoken with people, and gotten introduced people to Africa, what are some of the significant changes and developments that you've seen, that really kind of impressed you in Africa now that you've had that opportunity?
Well, and you mean from the people who we brought or from the
Well,
continent
just you in general. Like what has just really wowed you? Just something that has just been really significant that, development wise, or any changes, or just from the time that you've been there, or you've immersed yourself
Well,
with
I
doing
I
business.
love, like, the culture, right?
Yeah.
It's just
Mhm.
the culture is strong, and it's really interesting how much of, like, the Western world, like, culture is embraced, by those in Africa. Like, they know every artist, musical artist, they know every actor, they watch the films, they have the slang, they're the biggest users of social media, like,
Mhm.
between them and Latin America, like, they are fully present. I think that's just been really, really cool. But the other thing is, it's like the love that's there, right? Is that when you talk to a young person in Africa and ask them,
Mm.
what are you going to do with your first paycheck? It's not, I'm going to go out and buy a new pair of J's, right? Like some people will,
Mm.
right? But all of it is, I'm going to spend my paycheck to ensure that my mom doesn't have
Yeah.
to, buy groceries this week. Or I'm going to
Yeah.
figure out inside of my village how I, distribute my first pay. It's never like about them, the individual first. And it's so refreshing,
Family, yeah.
and it
Family
goes
oriented.
back to like where we
Community.
military, it's all about bigger, something bigger than yourself. And so I feel
Yes.
comfortable there because the mentality is the exact same as the mentality that I have.
Mhm. Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
that's interesting.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. I like it's a like so is it are they very community based that you've noticed? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely, it's all about the community, right? And there was a stat which I'll screw up, but there was an organization that ran like how far does a dollar touch inside of a community? Or
Mm.
and so in like in the North America, a dollar will touch, I think it's like 3.5 people, right? Like it will pass. In
Yeah.
like a place like Africa, it touches like 10 people, right? So it
Mm.
goes
Wow. Yeah.
so much further to impact. So, Benef, it kind of ties to your community. It's all about how does what I get, how does it make those around me?
Wow. No, I love
Yeah.
that. I mean, and so for people in America or whoever's listening to this, like how can we get more involved? How can we support your efforts or efforts that you would recommend we support? Because there's so much to do in that continent for people like us who have resources, but where do we
Yes.
start?
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it can be like that boil the ocean mentality you can catch up in, right? There's just so much.
Right.
So
So much
it
to do.
becomes
Yeah.
overwhelming. Where do I even start? And then if it becomes too overwhelming, then you just don't start at all, right? And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah.
I would
Exactly.
say that for me, the first is like figure out how do you get on the continent, right? You don't have to like travel the continent. You don't have to go like to multiple places, but like just go one time if you can and just touch it, feel it, walk it, interact, right? I think that is a way to get involved because doing that will cause you to be emotionally connected to whatever your next step is. Because if
Right.
you're emotionally connected, you might do one thing or two things in a short term, but long term, you're not going to be doing anything. And so I would recommend try to get there. And then once you're there, then even if you didn't do anything but like just tell the goodness after that, that would be enough. Because if enough people start changing the narrative and people start hearing that narrative coming from especially people that they never would think would say it,
Sure.
most likely aren't the people on this
Yeah.
call. They expect for
Yeah.
us to say it. They don't expect
Right.
a 65-year-old white male CEO to like say it.
Yep.
But we get more people to start just talking differently about the continent. I think that ripple effect,
There was a young woman that I know from high school, or both Trecia and I know from high school, Dr. Dewan, Amiel Dewan,
Yes.
she ran track and everything like that. I always say she's my sister from another mother because she did exactly that. And she always does that. Whenever she talks to someone, like she's telling me how African, like she's sending me pictures and videos of her in Rwanda. Clearly, you know, not only me, but a lot of people, when they think of Rwanda, they do not think of Prosper, you know,
Yes.
city. They think of Hotel Rwanda, like I did, you know. So you're right. It's enough people, and word of mouth is very, very important. So I'm glad you mentioned that because that is important. And I'm sick and tired of the fear mongering of people are just fear of going to Africa
Correct.
because of the misconceptions
Correct.
that people
Correct.
have.
Yep.
So
Mike, tell us about some upcoming projects or some developments or things that you all are doing with the Burns Brothers projects. Well, like what's going on? Like what's going on with the group? And
Yeah, we have a lot. Sometimes we feel like
what's
we
some
have
exciting things?
So on the theme of Africa, we have, and I didn't mention this as kind of in detail, like our sub businesses, but one of our sub businesses is a social club called HQ. And HQ, we built it as a community because we all know like the Soho houses and the things like that. And we felt as like professionals, specifically professionals of color, you like walk into these places like the Soho House and you're a member, but like you don't really quite feel like you could be your authentic self in those spaces. And so,
Sure.
especially in Washington, D.C., where you have so many, you know, Black and brown professionals there, like we felt they needed a space to come and kind of truly take off their jackets and their armor and just be, because they're often the onlys in any room, right?
Sure.
And so we created that there.
Yes.
And then
That's
now
awesome.
we're doing the same thing in Kenya. And so we're building a physical
Nice.
HQ Kenya. It's actually in a new city called Tattoo City.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that will be open here in the next 3 months. We're opening a restaurant in DC, an Asian fusion
Nice.
restaurant with a chef by the name of Tim Ma. We're opening that in Chinatown. And we're doing it not only because it's connected to our HQ location in DC, but the narrative that comes with, you know, a Black business partnering with an Asian chef inside of Chinatown, because we know
Yes.
between the Asian community and the Black community, like building that narrative of partnership to drive change forward through food and bringing people together. Once again, our whole theme, it might come different. A restaurant might be different, but the theme of driving understanding is
Yes.
the same.
That's
right?
awesome.
And so those are
It
two
sounds
things.
yummy.
Yeah. And everybody on this call will absolutely be invited. And then the last thing I want to kind of brag about.
Record that.
Yeah, record it, note it. You heard it here first. But the last thing to kind of brag about that we're super excited about, to go to back to the HQ theme, is that we're building this thing called the HQ Global Network, and we're doing it through like a digital like platform. It's like a social network, to where our goal is, how do we bring together 1 million Black professionals across the globe? And we think if you do that, then it not only drives community, but it helps us to control our narrative. I'm a big believer that at some point in time, we as Black folks can't allow our narrative be positioned and controlled by others. And so HQ Global Network, it's all about center of mass and like having the volume. Like the people who have, like, usually when change comes, it's tied to you hitting a certain number of people driving towards the same direction. Right. And so we get all these people together, and people of color will be the majority of folks around the globe. Now you can start really positioning and driving the change that you want to see, not waiting for others to determine they want to lean into supporting you in the change.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now,
So
that
those
was
are
very
things-
Sun Tzu with center of mass and volume.
Yes.
No, I
That's
like
awesome.
no,
Stuff.
I definitely like it, and that's good stuff, Mike. And look, I mean, because I think we've, you know, got to the crux of a lot of the questions that we wanted to ask you and stuff like that. But before, you know, we come to the ending of everything, I wanted to just give the floor to you and tell us, you know, if there's anything that you wanted to, you know, obviously free flow and say about this topic, as well as anything you wanted to throw out there with your company as well.
Well, what I will say, and so when we had a chance to talk before, one of the things that I really love about what you all are doing is actually in parallel with a question you all asked me about, you know, Africa. And my response being, well, sometimes you've got to go there and feel it, and touch it. And I think a lot of times that walls won't be knocked down, perceptions won't be erased, connections won't be made if they're not made in like a physical space through kind of risk of the
Take.
unknown. Right, and I really admire what's happening here because people of color especially are very risk adverse
Mm.
in like traveling. I always joke, and maybe we talked about this before, is that when I was at West Point, they allow you like your junior year to like
Mhm.
travel and go and get these immersive experiences. And I didn't even take advantage of it. I said, well, I'd rather
Mhm.
just sit in my room with my buddy, mixtapes, right? And everybody who looked like me, most of them did the exact same thing. I did,
Yep,
right?
this is
Oh,
true.
no.
Everyone who did not look
Yeah.
like me felt comfortable going to Europe and India and all these other amazing opportunities that West Point was giving them. And so even to this day, I consider myself educated. I consider myself smart, and I'm still like afraid of like stepping out. And I won't even, once I find a dish at a restaurant, I don't change that, right? Like I don't like doing things that I don't know. And so I always
Mm.
admire folks that go out there and enrich their lives. And by enriching their lives, they change the perspectives of others.
Yes.
And so I respect what you all are doing. And I want to support it however I can, because I think it goes back to that ripple, and the more people who see opportunity,
Mhm.
Black people, people of color travel to places, then it starts to give maybe not Mike permission, but it starts giving my two boys
Yeah.
permission because they
Yeah.
see it.
No.
We- That's
I'm
awesome. We
sorry.
appreciate that.
Yeah. I
Yeah, no,
mean,
we definitely appreciate that.
and you just motivated the hell out of me and inspired me on a lot of this,
Yeah.
the stuff you just said.
Yeah.
Because,
Wow.
Yeah.
obviously, look where we're at right now. Literally, we're on different states and continent.
Yeah.
Colorado, Texas, New York, Paris. And before we close, I just wanted to add on to what you just said about the fact that, hey, look, because I'm doing it and being, obviously a Black man, and I'm just telling you, look, go to these places,
Yeah.
go here, go there. I'm freaking living here, regardless if there's gonna be negativity against you. You're just
Mhm.
gonna have this. And we talked about this too, one-on-one too, Mike, whenever we hang out or something like that. You just gotta, like, I'm always in the same mindset of Nike, just do it. Because
Yeah.
I had that fear too as well. The only difference between me going through, regular university and you guys going through academies, y'all had money to go ahead and do it. They're like, here's free money, go do it. Where I was in college and we
Yeah.
had the same opportunities, but I was just afraid because because I don't have the money. And then I didn't want to be, I felt like I was going to be embarrassed because I'm somewhere where I'm not familiar with. And
Mm.
I want to change the narrative on that. Hence
Yeah.
why I'm here. And we start this podcast too, as well, of letting folks know culture and travel, we can do this shit too, as well. And just do it.
Absolutely.
Kind of
Absolutely.
thing.
And having the
Absolutely.
support, right? Yeah, I mean,
And having the support. Amen.
fear is so. I think that people that don't look like us have been programmed to be a lot more, to lean into risk a lot more because they know they have a support structure. So if they fall, someone can pick them up,
Yeah.
right? Like
Mhm.
because we haven't necessarily always had the support structure and things that are like foreign unknown, we start to be programmed just not to take risk.
Exactly.
Right.
But the
Exactly.
more, Benef's, Tricia's, Paul, there are out there, you start to create like the safety net for folks. Because I know if I fall inside of like Paris, like Paul's there, right? To pick me up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's also important. And that will start giving people not only permission to do it, but like this comfort that they know if they do it and they kind of fall and skip their knees, it's going to be somebody there to patch them up.
Sure.
Amen.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a great segue into ending this awesome discussion. Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to hook us up and be on here to chat with us a bit more about Africa and, demystifying a lot of the things that folks might have about the continent. That being said, I want to thank our listeners and our viewers. As always, please, if you have any comments or if you haven't already, like, subscribe, And as always, we appreciate any support, and please provide us with any feedback you have. So until next time, peace.
Whaaat.